detention room.
Everywhere I go, I'm in the spotlight. This is a good life. I'm living bold. This is what it looks like. I'm the ticket of the
So at least one ocean carrier is changing its detention billing practices based on the FMC's proposed detention and demurrage rule. Well, roughly based. But it's only a proposed rule, right? And it's still only in the rulemaking process. We're going to break it down a little bit more today. Hi, welcome to By Landed by Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain. Presented by the Maritime Professor, me. I'm Lauren Began, founder of the Maritime Professor and Squall Strategies. And I'm your favorite maritime attorney. Join me every week as we walk through both ocean transport and surface transport topics in the wild world of supply chain. As always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes only. It should not be construed to be legal advice, and there is no attorney-client privilege created by this video. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. So before we get into the discussion of the day, let's go through my top 3 stories of the week. And before we get into any of that, I just would like to say happy St. Patrick's Day. Today is March 17th. I'm coming to you live from just south of Boston, so I had to mention it, right? It is St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patrick's Day. It's a Friday. The Archdiocese of Boston actually gave an allowance to have corned beef and cabbage on an otherwise Friday non-meat day in Lent. So enjoy the day. All right, let's get into the stories of the week. Story number 1. It's still on our list. No language yet for the unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel-based accommodations. Supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking. Remember, we've talked about this pretty much every week. The FMC held their commission meeting and they said that they would be releasing a supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking, diving further into the questions raised by the comments in that last notice and comment period. Some of those questions were around documented export strategy. What does it mean? Is there a threshold? Is it just one of the criteria? The unreasonableness to negotiate elements that might be associated with that. Look, I actually might pull this one off of our top 3 stories of the week for now. I know that I said we're going to keep it on. But at least from the 2024 budget justification, it looks like we may not see text on this for maybe a few more months. When the hearing came up, it sounded like it was coming any day now. But look, the budget justification said June 2023 expected for a supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking. I don't know if that is actually for the supplemental round or if that is for the conclusion of the entire rule. Either way, it just feels like it's signaling that a weekly watch is probably futile. And maybe you might be getting sick of it, right? And we only have top 3 stories of the day, so it's taking up valuable real estate on my top 3. So anyways, I think we're going to pull it off, but still waiting on that text. Speaking of the 2024 budget justification, story number 2, the FMC released its 2024 budget justification. So that's exactly what it is, right? They are justifying their budget requests. Well, it's really a great self-reflection summary of how the FMC thinks they did over the past year. It's almost kind of like a self-assessment that we all have to fill out before we have our annual reviews, right? You're about to have your annual review and they basically say, let me know all the great things that you did this year and we'll talk about if you get a raise. Technically, the American public, the taxpayers, right, are the boss in that scenario of the FMC. Do you think they deserve a raise? I may actually cover this budget justification as an entire episode topic because there's some pretty interesting information in here. And obviously, like I said, it's the FMC kind of reflecting on the job they've done, the things that they are doing. They hit some kind of lesser known, lesser talked about areas of what the FMC does on an annual basis. Global Regulatory Summit is mentioned in there. But today I just wanted to highlight a few things, but I think I'm going to be adding this to a full episode topic coming up. So to support the Commission's mission and statutory responsibilities, the FMC says the FMC total budget requested for fiscal year 2024 is $43,720,000. $43 million. Seems like a lot, right? It seems like a lot. But it's not really. Like in the grand scheme of things, Department of Transportation Maritime Administration gives out grants larger than that sometimes. The entire Federal Maritime Commission budget that they're requesting is $43 million. And so they break it down a little bit. $33.4 million is just for salaries and expenses. So that's just for the employees, which also feels like a lot, like, okay, 33 million of 43 million requested, but they only have, they don't have a lot of people working there, right? Like 150-ish people. And so that's a significant portion is just to salaries and expenses there. So they say that the 33.4 million in the request is for salaries and expenses to support 180 full-time positions and 163 full-time equivalents. So in addition, 10.9 million will be allocated toward other operating expenses that include rent, building security, information technology, IT, and administrative services. So building security, I just want to kind of mention that. So federal agencies, for the most part, especially in DC, have to have kind of like an entry office. And so that's part of what that is. They're over on North Capitol Street. And so part of their building has security involved with it. So just so that you don't highlight that and you think, what are they using built? It's part of kind of the deal. And certainly rent in Washington, D.C. is expensive, right? And obviously IT, they have some areas that they could upgrade. So they're only asking for 10.9 million. I say only, but really that's rent, that's building, that's IT and administrative services. So they also talk about their strategic goals that I want to highlight here. We talk about them we talk about them when we kind of talk about larger ideas of the FMC, but I think it's always important to kind of bring it back. So the mission statement: ensure a competitive and reliable international ocean transportation supply system that supports the U.S. economy and protects the public from fair and deceptive practices. I always when I mention the mission, I always really highlight they want to ensure a competitive and reliable international ocean transportation system, and it supports the U.S. economy and protects the public. And their mission is to protect the public from unfair and deceptive practices. It's so important to keep that in mind as we kind of talk about the FMC, because it helps you kind of understand where they might go next, right? Where they're kind of, where their directives are. They want to protect from unfair and deceptive. They want it to be in the light. I always say that, right? The FMC kind of works in the light, not in the dark. And they want to make sure that it's reliable, but also competitive. So that's really where they come in. We've seen them act in accordance of that mission, at least in recent years. The two strategic goals that they now list, and then a stewardship objective. Strategic goal number 1, maintain a competitive and reliable international ocean transportation supply system. All right, so it's kind of reinvigorating or restating the mission statement, right? Maintain a competitive and reliable international supply system. And then strategic goal 2, protect the public from unlawful, unfair, and deceptive ocean transportation practices. Unlawful is a new word added since that mission, but I think that all of this is obviously in line. It's kind of like the mission has 2 parts, so they broke it into 2 parts. One, strategic goal 1, the other, strategic goal 2. The stewardship objective is advance the FMC's performance through excellence in organizational management. And they have some sub-objectives here: strengthen infrastructure and effective resource management, and foster a high-performing, engaged, and diverse workforce where staff understand how their efforts contribute to the goals of the commission. All great. Basically that says we want to make sure that we are a lean, mean operating machine, and they kind of are with only 40 million, compared to some of the other agencies out there. So I just want to talk a little bit about those salaries and positions again. So employee salary and benefits, they're only asking for a 6.1 million increase here. And they are going to be going from, they said the budgets provided in fiscal year 2022 and 2023 resulted in an increase from 149 to 180 full-time positions. That's 30 people, right? 31 people that they increased, where maybe 5-10 years ago, they only had 120 people. Now they've almost, it's a stretch to say they've almost doubled, but really they have significantly increased their full-time employees, their full-time positions. So in fiscal year 2024, they're asking for a $6.1 million increase for salaries and benefits. It also includes a little projected pay raise of 5.29%, which, if we know inflation these days isn't even covering necessarily inflation. So the total cost for the salaries is $33.4 million. I mean, I think this is all fair, but I just wanted to highlight that because as we talk about the Federal Maritime Commission, I think it's so important to remember they really don't have a lot of money being allocated to them for the section of the world that they cover. 90% of everything moves by ocean transport. And they have a $40 million budget, right? I mean, there's line items in other budgets that's bigger than this. Like I said, grant money is given out that's larger than that. The other area I wanted to quickly highlight in this budget justification, the FMC talks about the VOCC audit program. We've talked about that before. Basically, in July 2021, Chairman Maffei launched this VOCC audit program. The FMC kind of talks about this and says the initiative involved the ongoing collection of qualitative and quantitative information from the largest ocean common carriers, as well as regular meetings with carrier representatives regarding the Commission's key priorities, including detention and demurrage. So they continue on and say, in fiscal year 2022, the FMC began publishing aggregated information on the levels and trends of detention and demurrage fees charged and collected by carriers, updated quarterly and published on the Commission's website. Also in fiscal year 2022, the VOCC audit program scope expanded to include a focus on exports. And what I really wanted to highlight here is they talk about the VOCC audit team meets with carriers to discuss trends in the volumes of exports carried, with a particular focus on agriculture exports. But they also talk about just these meetings with ocean carriers have proven to be an effective way. This is direct quote out of the budget justification. Meetings with ocean carriers have proved to be an effective way to communicate Commission priorities and gather their questions. These meetings have been used to identify appropriate points of contact for compliance and charge complaints, reinforce Commission policy statements, update carriers on upcoming Commission activities, and understand information gaps. I mean, how great, right? This is a great thing. It certainly has, it feels like expanded beyond the VOCC audit that it originally was. I mean, perhaps this will turn into its own area of the Regulated Entity Office with subcategory VOCCs. There's just this outreach that's happening, this now open line, and they really always had a pretty good open line with ocean common carriers. I mean, right? That's it. Those were regular conversations. But now to have these purposeful conversations where these meetings are kind of like they're scheduled, right? They're with frequency probably. They probably have some structure around it. And now they're being used to identify appropriate points of contact for compliance and charge complaints. That's great. Reinforcing Commission policy statements so that nobody's surprised by, anything that the Commission might be doing. And then updating carriers on upcoming Commission activities and understand information gaps. I mean, that's it, right? There's a lot going on with the FMC. I mean, anybody who listens here is listening because they want to know, at least in part, what's going on with the FMC. And that's what I'm trying to bring you on a weekly basis. Not just the FMC, but ocean generally. But certainly we focus pretty heavily on the FMC. But they want to make sure that they're openly communicating with everyone they can, right? So especially those that they regulate, to make sure that there aren't surprises in either direction. I said this earlier today even, the FMC is operating in the light, not in the dark. They really want to make sure that there's open lines of communication. And I think having these open lines of communications are so crucial and key in an effective operating supply chain. Like I said at the beginning, I think I might be covering this in the next week or two, certainly one of the next coming weeks. But let's collectively decide, do they deserve this raise? I mean, I think so, right? They're working pretty dang hard with only 150-ish, 180-ish employees. They got a lot going on. And as Chairman Maffei usually says, it's not often that your workload is directed directly from the Congress. So they have a lot on their plate. But I think they're meticulously and pretty expeditiously moving through it. They're missing a couple deadlines on their rulemakings, but in the interest of getting it right. They want to make sure that they're doing a good job and that these rules will stick for a while because they want to actually help the industry. That was only story number 2. All right, story number 3. Well, today we are going to be talking a little bit about Maersk, but it's funny. Today I came across a video posted from Maersk saying, how do you say Maersk? So Maersk posted this video of many of its employees pronouncing Maersk in many different ways. And the crux of the post is that there is no correct way to say Maersk. That's what the post said. the LinkedIn post. Look, I know that I personally have been told by a few different people in certainly a few different pronunciation ways that there is a correct way to pronounce it. I typically say Maersk, kind of like mayor of maritime, Maersk. But how do you say it? Are you actually, as you're listening to this, saying it out loud to yourself right now? Like, I've heard Maersk. The video goes through a few different areas that I hadn't even heard pronounced before. Certainly it's a Danish word, but how do you say Maersk? All right, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of the day here. So a little over a week ago, Eric Johnson of the JOC reported on an alert that Maersk sent out, and this is where Maersk comes into our conversation, that Maersk sent out regarding billing of detention charges. So Eric reported that, and I quote here, Maersk will be billing container detention charges directly to consignees on so-called merchant haulage moves from April 1st, saying, end quote, saying this decision is connected kind of to the FMC's, well, not kind of, it's connected to the FMC's ongoing rulemaking on detention and demurrage billing practices. So what did the actual customer advisory say? It said, we will update our U.S. import detention billing practices to no longer include motor carriers by default on merchant haulage moves. Instead, all import detention invoices will by default be issued to the consignee on the bill of lading. So let's go back. So this is saying that this is all from the detention and demurrage billing practices ongoing rulemaking that the FMC is undertaking. So we covered this October 14th, 2022. So that week, the FMC had released, I think it might have even been that day, right? Released the language for their proposed notice of proposed rulemaking for the detention and demurrage billing practices. So let's kind of do a little refresher there. So in the section of properly issued invoices, and I'm going to be quoting some of the language actually from the notice of proposed rulemaking from October that the FMC released. So under the proposed rule, and remember, this is still just a proposed rule, so that we kind of know the lay of what was happening. October 14th, or I think it was that day, right around there, the FMC released the notice of proposed rulemaking, the text, and then they had it open for 60 days for comments. They received over 180 comments just on detention and demurrage rulemaking. And so what happened during that time is that they, that's it. So they collected the comments, and now that's what's happening. We haven't moved much past that notice of proposed rulemaking. They are going through all those comments file. They are putting them into buckets of kind of arguments, and they're going to be addressing each kind of theme of comment on the next round. We don't know if it's going to be a final rule. The kind of natural next step would be that the FMC would publish a final rule where they kind of say, here's the text. If 30 days or 60 days from now we don't get any significant adverse comments, then this is going to be final. Or maybe we'll have another supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking. That was kind of a curveball that we had for the other rulemaking, but maybe we'll have that here because there are still things under consideration. There are still some pretty big topics, and arguably this is one of them, right? So properly issued invoice. So under the notice of proposed rulemaking, under the proposed rule, a properly issued invoice is an invoice that is only issued to the person that has contracted with the billing party for the carriage of goods or space to store cargo, and is therefore the person responsible for the payment of any incurred demurrage or detention charge. The proposed rule would prohibit billing parties from issuing demurrage or detention invoices to persons other than the person for whose account the billing party provided ocean transportation or storage. They're basically saying, look, the proposed rule is saying you can't necessarily issue the D&D invoices to persons other than the person whose account the billing party provided ocean transportation. So they want the direct connection. And this is a little bit confusing because then later they do say, well, you can if you want to. But this is saying the proposed rule would prohibit billing parties from issuing demurrage or detention invoices. That's not entirely what they ultimately say. So as a result of anecdotal reports indicating, this is what the FMC is saying, indicating that billing parties sometimes sent invoices to multiple parties for the same shipments. So the commission asked whether this practice occurred regularly, and they said many commenters described a current widespread practice where the billing party sends the invoice to multiple parties, most of whom are not the recipient of the service giving rise to the invoice charge. It says other commenters noted that invoicing multiple parties resulted in duplicative payments, which further complicates resolving invoice disputes. So they might be sending out an invoice, and this is kind of previous because I think this has gotten cleaned up. But previously, invoices might be going out, sent out to a bunch of different people without kind of a CC list of who it's going out to. You get an invoice, you put it in the system and you process it. You figure, well, I gotta pay it, and so you might get multiple payments on that invoice that went out. So that's kind of what the FMC was trying to really address here. They wanted to dive into that a little bit further and clean that up so that you weren't getting three people paying on the same invoice, and it requires a little bit of administrative work to make sure that you don't and that you don't collect extra money there, but then also, what do? Then you have to kind of figure out internally, well, which one is the correct person to be paying? I don't know if that side of things was happening. All right, so let's continue on with what this notice of proposed rulemaking was saying. So the commission said that they understand that concerns with invoices being sent to those individuals without a contractual relationship, and they acknowledge that this practice only exacerbates dispute resolution and efficient movement of cargo, basically saying that makes it more confusing by having multiple people and different parties each time. So they were trying to make it a little bit more streamlined. Commission says, as was pointed out in the final rule of the Supply Chain Innovation Team Initiative, the SKY Team Initiatives, under the direction of Commissioner Dye, it said the United States international supply chain is a complex, dynamic ecosystem. Commissioner Dye has said that quite a bit. She says that the supply chain is a ecosystem, which basically means there's a lot of different, very complicated parts. The commission continues on, the lack of direct customer relationships between actors in this system, such as shippers and terminals, impedes cooperative problem solving, exacerbates disruptions, and makes recovering from disruptions more difficult. And that's where the commission says this is exactly the case here, where motor carriers, customs brokers, and others who do not have customer relationships with common carriers are being asked to resolve disputes. So the commission continues, the commission believes that prohibiting billing parties from issuing demurrage and detention invoices to person with whom they do not have a genuine commercial relationship will similarly benefit the supply chain. If the billed party has firsthand knowledge of the terms of its service contract with a common carrier, then they are in a better position to ensure that they and the carrier are abiding by those terms. Basically saying they want this direct contractual relationship because who better to know what the rules are, what the rules of the engagement, what the rules of the contract are, than the people who either created it or signed it or both. The commission continues on. When demurrage or detention invoice disputes do arise, the billed party is in a better position than third parties, such as truckers and customs brokers, to analyze the accuracy of the charge. So they're kind of doubling down on that, basically saying that when the dispute arises, you can actually go check the contract that you either created or signed if you have that direct contractual commercial relationship. Whereas if you're just outside of it and you don't have that service contract relationship, you didn't negotiate those terms, how are you going to be able to figure out the accuracy of the charge? You're on the hook for it, but you have no idea of how to verify, or not in all cases, but certainly some. You can't verify the accuracy of the charge without pretty much going through some hefty avenues to try to figure out, well, okay, what is supposed to be accurate here? So when the billed party, commission continues, when the billed party disputes a charge, they have an existing commercial relationship with the billing party and are in a better position to resolve the dispute. That's under this new proposed way. They say practically the proposed rule would prohibit billing parties from invoicing motor carriers or customs brokers. If adopted, that's the most important part. If adopted, this is all proposed language. This is all, here's what we're thinking language from the FMC. So it said, if adopted, the proposed rule would not prevent motor carriers from paying on behalf of the billed party. Although a motor carrier could pay on behalf of a billed party, the motor carrier would not be liable for these charges and could not be penalized for non-payment of charges. So they also say only the person who contracted with the common carrier for the carriage or storage of goods may be issued an invoice. There are a variety of shipping arrangements that allocate risk, obligation, and cost between the shipper and the consignee named on the bill of lading. Commission continues, considering these arrangements, the commission is specifically seeking comment on whether it would be appropriate to also include the consignee named on the bill of lading as another person who may receive a demurrage or detention invoice. Like I said, this is a proposed rule. They even said if adopted. And now in this same section, they're talking about whether they're specifically asking for additional comments. So even more, like, we're not done here yet. We still have a lot to determine. The commission continues. The proposed rule should simplify the current system and ensure that only the person with the most knowledge about the shipment and who is in the best position to understand and dispute the charge receives a demurrage or detention invoice. Like I said, the ones who negotiated that contract, the service contract or whatever it is, the ones who kind of have information about what the charges and rules should look like. The commission continues. The commission views the practice of sending an invoice to multiple parties involved in the shipping transaction rather than sending an invoice for demurrage or detention charges to only the person that has contract with billing party as untenable. So they're saying sending it to everybody versus sending it to a direct contractual relationship is just unnecessarily messy. They call it untenable. Therefore, the proposed rule would prohibit such a practice and require that only the person that has contracted with the billing party for the carriage of goods or storage of goods receive an invoice for incurred D&D charges. Okay, so that I wanted to take that extra time and talk about what the proposed rule said. So now, where are we? So Mayor said that they're acting proactively in a quote given to JOC, and this is all from the article here, going back to the article that Eric had written. Where an unnamed mayor spokesperson said to the JOC, with the FMC's ongoing rulemaking process, we're aiming to line up a better billing process that helps truckers and customers. Again, what did the customer advisory say? I quote, we will update our U.S. import detention billing practices to no longer invoice motor carriers by default on merchant haulage moves. Instead, all import detention invoices will by default be issued to the consignee on the bill of lading. Eric also says later in the article here that Mayor said in the advisory that shippers can indicate whether they would still prefer to have drayage providers billed first for detention. So they are building in that, but you can still determine where you want it to go. So this is pretty interesting, and I think this is interesting for two real big reasons. I think this is a great idea to build from, right? I mean, it shows, look, we're listening. It shows that Maersk is saying, we're listening, FMC, we see you, we see this rulemaking. But the caution that I have here, right, is that it seems that this is still very much under discussion. And actually, some people aren't entirely on board with the FMC's proposed single-payer suggestion. So it may still change or be modified. I don't think it's going to significantly change, but I do think that we need to build in some of the operational considerations. And I say that because at least some of the comments filed, the commenters were talking about some of these operational challenges that this may cause on, you know, being so close to it and then having to, the article also talks about drayage providers, you know, when they have disputes arising from any of this, like how do they solve some of those problems? Like we said at the very beginning, right? The final report of the supply chain innovation team that the FMC even referenced in this proposed rulemaking, but from their own supply chain innovation team initiative, the United States international supply chain is a complex, dynamic ecosystem. So yes, for the reasons that the FMC laid out, this direct contractual commercial relationships does seem to solve these problems. Right, double, triple payments on a single invoice because of too many people on the invoice distribution. Yes, certainly helps to streamline that. So this dispute resolution is cleaner between contractual relationship parties. In the simplistic presentation, it seems to solve that. And I don't want to muddy the waters on the good, right? Like I want to make sure that we're still moving forward. I think that this is a great proposal in general because it is kind of streamlining that otherwise messy, I don't know what the terms are, but I'm bound to these terms kind of things that happen. But look, the other thing is here, there's some action being taken on this proposed rule, but this is still a proposed rule. It's not an actual rule. This is very much still fluid process. It looks like the FMC is trying to clean up and streamline processes wherever they can, right? Like that's kind of what they're doing across the board. But this is still very much under discussion. And the FMC was even directly asking for comments on this proposal. Like we read earlier, in the actual text of the notice of proposed rulemaking, they're saying, we'd love you to comment on this section. And they received comments. We've been kind of ticking through all of the comments, all the 180 comments. For a while, I was doing episodes where we were highlighting a summary of the comments. Look, I don't think it's a bad thing for mayors to do this at all. I actually like it because it kind of signals we're listening, right? Because they've added the option to add additional billed parties here too. They've added some kind of options. They're basically just saying, look, our natural billing is going to go from over here to now our automatic billing is going to go this way. We can still bill over there if you'd like. But look, I just want to caution. I saw this being reported a few different areas. This is still a rule making. It's not a final rule. This is still under works. And that's the trouble with some of these processes, right? Like, so the Congress had their statutory mandates that came out with the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. They said, and those 13 invoice requirements, that was immediate. Charge complaints, that was immediate. Those went into effect right away. They didn't say FMC will interpret this in a rulemaking. They said, this is the rule. That's immediate. But these other areas that the FMC is tackling, detention and demurrage certainly being one of them, billing practices, beyond the 13, I almost said nautical miles, beyond the 13 invoice requirements of the D&D billing that Congress set out, now they're kind of filling in the rest of the, like, it's almost like Congress outlined it and now they got to fill in with the crayon the rest of the story, the rest of the picture here. And that's what they're doing, but it's still in the works. It's still a rulemaking. Rulemakings take a while and on purpose, right? They want to make sure that they're getting it right. They want, all rulemakings want that back and forth engagement with the industry. That's the comment period. That's why it's so important to submit comments, because the FMC is mulling over those comments that were submitted. Highlighted, they did directly discuss this direct contractual relationship. Was it enough to change the FMC's mind? Is it enough to change where we think we're going to be going with this direct commercial relationship? I think that's going to potentially modify it a little bit, maybe fine tune it. But again, this is still a rulemaking, not a final rule. So it's just so important that we keep that in mind, especially as we've been hearing some kind of declaratory things about some of the things the FMC's been doing reported in the press. Some of these things aren't declaratory final moments yet. It's just so important to understand the larger picture. I'm going to keep trying to explain it. And again, I'm still learning here too. So, I certainly understand the FMC, but if there's anything that I'm missing here, if there's anything that you want to fill in more information, I'm happy to have these engagements in the comments on wherever it is. But as always, this guidance here is for general and educational purposes. It should not be construed to be legal advice directly related to your matter. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. But if you have specific legal questions, feel free to reach out to me at my legal company, Squall Strategies. I'm going to keep watching all these rulemakings. I think they are fascinating. I'm going to keep breaking them down for you. But stay tuned. We're going to be covering all of this on By Land and By Sea. Guidance here is general, educational purposes only. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. Otherwise, for the non-legal questions, for the e-learning, the general industry information and insights, come find me at the Maritime Professor. If you like these videos, comment, let me know. Comment, like, and share. If you want to listen to these episodes on demand, or if you missed any previous episodes, like that October episode where we talk about the notice of proposed rulemaking, check out the podcast By Land and By Sea. If you prefer to see the video, they live on my YouTube page, By Land and By Sea, presented by the Maritime Professor. And while you're at it, check out the website, maritimeprofessor.com. Sign up for our newsletter. So until next week, this is Lauren Began, the Maritime Professor, and you've just listened to By Land and By Sea. See you next time.